Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning is a game with a very long name. It's a hack and slash role-playing game. That's how I would define it. But it's not quite as simple as that. Think of it like the love child of an MMO and a hack and slash. Now, when I say MMO, I'm not talking about full like MMO. It just feels the world is set out like in this sort of a Guild Wars 2 kind of way. That's how I see it anyway. So you play as the Fateless One, which, long story short, is a guy or gal that has no fate whatsoever, and you eventually find out that you can actually change fate because you haven't got one. So that's an interesting concept. I'm not sure if it was really implemented well enough. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of potential there. Like, if you're the Fateless One, you can remake Fate. Just imagine what they could have done. Like, it probably would have gone over and above the scope of a regular RPG. But just imagine if they gave you more freedom in reshaping events and even the world in a physical and meaningful way. That would have been really cool, and that would have given you more feeling of being the Fateless One, right? At the moment, it's, you know, just like most games, oh, you're the chosen one, but you don't feel chosen. What does it mean to be the chosen one? Yeah, you know what I mean? Anyway, so you've got the classic 3 core classes of RPGs. You got the warrior, that's governed by the might tree, the rogue that's governed by finesse, and the mage that's governed by sorcery, I think. Yeah, I think that's what they call it. Anyway, so you can put points, skill points, into any of these 3 trees, and you can mix them up to your heart's content, and that would be fine if not a little generic. But then they give you these destinies on top of that. For example, if you put 6 points into magic, into sorcery, and 6 points into finesse, the rogue tree, then it unlocks a fate card that allows you to start progressing down the sorcery slash finesse tree, right? And it means that you're officially both a wizard and a rogue, and it gives you extra bonuses for that. For example, at the top tier, I think it's level 6 of the sorcery finesse combo tree, you get blink, which replaces your regular dodge and gives you like this poison aura type thing as you blink. If you go pure mage, you also get blink, but it's a different type of blink. It doesn't have that poison aura. So it's just those little details I think are really cool. They didn't have to do stuff like that, but it's this nice little thematic thing that just makes you feel like, yes, I am officially a mage slash rogue. I thought that was really cool. So all 3 of the core classes have their own weapons. I believe it's 3 per class. You've got the warrior has a long sword, great sword, which is just a 2-handed sword, and a hammer, which is this big, heavy thing that makes it really hard to hit certain things, but does a lot of damage. Then the mages get staff, which is like their short to medium range staff weapon, basically. Usually has some type of fire damage on it, some sort of elemental thing. Then you've got wands, which is very much a long range artillery type of thing. And then you've got chakrams that are like, it's like these blade rings that you sort of throw and they shoot elemental damage and shit. It's interesting. I don't necessarily like them, but but they are an interesting thing that you don't see very often. And then the rogues have your standard daggers, bows, and then fey blades, which you should see here. This character right here will be using them in a second. They're basically this long blade that you sort of hold in the middle and like freak out and do all these spinning attacks. Pretty cool. On top of that, all 3 classes have their own spells, and not just traditional magic spell casting type thing, but also abilities. So I mean, you can give your rogue spells or your warrior spells. That totally works. But you can also have abilities like the rogue setting traps or applying poison to all their weapons as like a passive ability. There's also one where you can sort of throw smoke in the face of the enemy and then follow it up with shooting like morning stars at them. And that uses mana as well. So it's sort of like, yeah, it is very much like warrior spells and rogue spells, which I actually like. So this means that you don't have to have your pure warrior casting spells. You can give him abilities, even rogue abilities if you want, and while they still use mana, they don't seem like spells. It's just another thematic subtlety that makes the whole class system really cool. Like at first you think it's just shallow, oh, these 3 classes, but when you dig deeper, it's actually quite complex and satisfying, I feel, and it's one of the best things about the game. Let's talk about combat. Let's start with the good things. So it's very fast-paced and fluid. You got a primary weapon and a secondary weapon, and you can put absolutely anything you want in those slots. From the very start of the game, you can use any weapon. Maybe not very effectively, but you can equip it and you can use it. Same with armor, which is very awesome. So like I had my my pure mage running around in heavy armor, which is friggin' cool. In fact, I just like heavy armor. I got my rogue here that you can see. Wearing heavy armor as well, and she's sneaking around, and it seems to work fine. So yes, the primary and secondary weapon thing, you can switch between the two of them really quickly, even mid-fight. Now there are there's moves that work like combos, sort of, but they're not. You're not going to see like this huge combo score thing, just going pew 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 over and over again. Like it's more. The combos are more like unofficial, if that makes sense. The combat is so fluid that you'll be stringing together combos by default. So in effect, you can sort of do a couple hits with your longsword, then pull out your staff and whack them a little bit, because staves are more AoE. So like if little enemies start to come in close, you can push them all back with your staff, and then you pull your sword out again, and it's so fast that it just feels like it's one combo, and that's extremely satisfying. And then you can throw in a dodge, which is going to, break your sort of like reset, come out of whatever animation you're in very fast. So it's very responsive. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's very responsive and fluid and satisfying. And on top of that, you've got a fate meter, which kind of works like a secondary experience bar that fills up a lot quicker. And when that's full from laying the smackdown on enemies, then you can trigger these finishing moves, and it uses up all the fate that you've stored up. And basically, you turn into this badass, and time sort of slows down a bit, and your attacks are a lot more potent. You deal a lot more damage, and then when you take down an enemy, so you can take them all down, and then you walk up to one of them because they're sort of in a down state. They're not quite dead yet, and then you can press a button. It'll go into this quick time event where you just got to mash this button and try to fill up this meter, and it stabs them or crushes them, and basically you summon what seems like a random sort of fate weapon that's just like ridiculous in size and is glowing and whatnot, and you absolutely decimate things, and I believe then you get a bonus in experience for everything that you've killed in the vicinity. So that's pretty cool. That's like, you're the fateless one, and I suppose that is trying to portray the power that you have, showing that you are changing fate. But still, it seems kind of flimsy, and that moves on into the next point. All right, now the bad things. It feels really gamey. All right, especially like, for example, the blocking. You equip a shield, either a physical shield or a magical shield, which I believe they call talismans. And you got a shield button, you got a block button, and it just pulls this shield out of nowhere. It's like, well, where the shit was I holding the shield? It literally just boo, not even any particle effects or anything like you're summoning it. That would have been fine. But just this shield comes out, and it's like, what? So I mean, that's just like a visual thing that sort of annoyed me, but it's fine. But it just feels like it feels clunky. For example, I mean, I know Skyrim is not a good example of good combat, but in Skyrim, you equip your one-handed weapon, you equip your shield, and you can see your shield there all the time, and you can just, it feels real, and it feels nice that you can see that you got your shield, and when you block with that, with the second mouse button, with the right click, that shield comes up and protects you. In Kingdoms of Amalur, you don't have that same responsiveness with the shield. So it's like the combat, when you're attacking, it's very fluid and responsive, but the shield is this entirely separate button that's away from the attack buttons, and it's like, well, that's it. Your attack is over now, and you're just blocking. It's kind of hard to explain, but it just kind of took me out of the combat. Furthermore, something that kind of annoyed me, but again, just a personal preference type thing, I feel like there were weapons missing. I mean, the warrior gets a long sword, a two-handed sword, and a two-handed hammer, and that's it. What doesn't this world believe in maces? I want some of that going on here. It just seems really restricted. I noticed like the mages have their short range weapon, their staff, the medium range weapon, which is the chakrams, and the long range weapon, which is the wand, and that works really well because you can see quite clearly that there's a weapon for every job, right? So you can equip like a staff and a wand, and so you can pull the enemies with your wand, blasting them with this awesome like cannon type thing coming out of a little stick of wood, and then when they come in close, you hit them with the AoE close range staff attacks, and it makes sense. But the other two classes, I mean, the rogue is still not bad because you've got the long range bow, and then you've got two short range weapons, which are daggers and fey blades, but I don't see much difference between them. I'm not seeing why you would pick daggers over fey blades, and maybe I'm just dense here. So if you guys can tell me like the benefits of a dagger over a fey blade and vice versa, please do in the comments. But then the warrior weapons are even worse. So I suppose with the warrior weapons, it's varying degrees of speed, I suppose, because you got the one-handed sword, which is the fast weapon, and then you got the two-handed sword, which is like the medium speed weapon, and then the hammer, which is the slow weapon. And I suppose that makes sense, but I mean, it would have been nice if they gave us a one-handed axe and a two-handed axe and a one-handed mace or one-handed hammer. It just seems really strange that they left those out. I don't know. It's just a pet peeve of mine. I like maces. What do you want? But back on the concept of the combat in general, I would call it challenging yet fair. Now, the reason I say that is if you're looking for visual cues from the enemies that they're about to attack, and if you time your attacks and your dodges correctly, with those cues, you got to do fine. I was playing on medium difficulty, which is labeled normal, and I did die a few times, and it's mostly because like I'd get overwhelmed by wolves they're very fast attackers, so you just got to really dodge all over the place, try and get out from the middle of the pack because they like to circle around you, and pick them off one by one, or just hit them with super AoE. The only time I'd say that the combat is not fair is when there are camera issues. Especially when you're using a controller, which I actually do prefer, believe it or not. The camera is really difficult to control. in general, because you got to take your thumbs off the attack buttons in order to move the camera. So you're sort of out of the action just so that you can maneuver yourself and actually see what's going on. Now, the camera does not govern which direction you're attacking, and that can be a little confusing at times. It's actually the facing of your character. So more than a few times I've actually hit thin air, especially with the bow, just because I was so used to the idea of the camera being like your crosshairs of where you're going to attack, that I just ended up shooting like nothing and then getting stabbed in the back by something. So I mean, I'm not sure if it's just something I need to get used to, but I mean, after however many hours I played quite a bit, and it still feels weird. So I'm just going to put it down as the camera should be better. I'm not sure how you'd fix that. Maybe if there was a button that allows you to lock to behind your character while you're fighting, that'd be cool. Like, to give you the option to do that. I reckon that I'd find that useful. Alright, so the classes and the combat are by far the best parts of the game. So kind of starts to go downhill from here. Let's talk about the UI. I mean, it gets the job done barely, but it is pretty terrible, especially with a keyboard and mouse. There's just so much ridiculous clicking going on. I mean, and to change your weapons, I mean, maybe this is not something you want to do that often, but to change your weapons, you've got to go through so much. You got to go into your inventory, then click primary weapon, then find the drop down menu for the weapon you want to search, that you want to equip, and then you have to double click on the weapon to equip it. What? Why double click? Of course, it's simpler on a controller because you don't have to double click anything, but still, it's just this convoluted process. I mean, it works, but surely they could have come up with something a little easier. Like, the combat is so fluid. It's just, and to go into the menu, which is the complete opposite, it's like, oh my god. Plus, the menu isn't particularly nice looking. So, I don't know. Look, I hear a lot of people complaining about the menus in Skyrim, the default menus in Skyrim, saying that they're terrible, especially for PCs. Personally, I don't think they're that bad, with the exception of the wonky mouse support. But just to give you some perspective here, compared to Kingdoms of Amalur, the Skyrim menu system is phenomenal. And that's all I'm going to say. Okay, graphics and performance. It looks very pretty. It's stylized, so, oversized weapons and just exaggerated facial features and stuff like that. It's sort of, I wouldn't necessarily call it cartoony, because I think that's a term that gets thrown around way too much, especially when it doesn't actually apply. I'd say it's a fairy tale style. So it's sort of like, yes, like storybook fairy tale type thing. Think like a more generic version of Guild Wars 2. This game heavily reminds me of Guild Wars 2, funnily enough. But not necessarily in a good way. Like, I love Guild Wars 2. I don't think I can find any fault with it. But I mean, this feels like the poor cousin of the poor single-player cousin of Guild Wars 2. That's what it feels like. It's very generic. Even sections where it should be wow moments, like this absolutely enormous tree that you have to walk up and talk to. I mean, that should be exciting. It should be like you step into this cavern and, whoa, look at this ridiculous tree. But it just, I don't know, it wasn't. The wow moments aren't there when they should be. And I think just the best word I can use to explain why is just generic. It hasn't got its own personality. which is a shame. On the bright side though, performance is great. I'm on a 4-year-old system and I get about 60 frames per second, normally 30 when I'm recording. However, it has crashed more than a few times, and I suspect that it's because of Origin. Because Origin keeps crashing. Like half the time Origin crashes and the game keeps going, and the other half the game crashes. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there, whether it's Origin or not, but just on the whole, Origin sucks, I reckon. Alright. Let the flaming begin. Alright, now for arguably the most important part of an RPG, the story. It's reasonably interesting, but it's no The Lord of the Rings or Dragon Age Origins. The story was compelling enough that I wanted to see the end of it, but not so compelling that I played non-stop. I think also the crashes had a part in that. Like it'd crash and then I'd have to go back and do something again. That just pissed me off. So I'm like, damn it. Just, alright, enough for today. I can't be bothered playing that section again. Which is, I mean, that really sucks when that takes you out of the experience and makes you want to stop playing. But hey, there you have it. Voice acting is incredibly inconsistent. Sometimes it works, but a lot of the time it's laughably egregious. The tone just doesn't match what they're saying or the emotion of the scene. When it is good though, it's quite funny actually, but I'm not sure if it was intended to be. Alright, now choices. Now this is not really a game with choices of great consequence. It's not a BioWare game. But I have found a couple side quests that give you some freedom in how you resolve them. For example, I came across this town that was plagued by giant spiders, and shortly after you try to exterminate them, you discover that they're led by this fabled spider queen. So then you go to take her out, but then she presents you with this option. Okay, you can attack me and I'll kill you with all my giant spiders. Or you can go and slay the townsfolk for me and I'll leave you alone. So, I mean, that kind of stuff surprised me because it's such a like bright, happy looking fantasy world, and then there's these really dark moments of, wow, I can now slaughter the entire population of this small town. Which is kind of cool, but there's also no real consequences for that. You can like turn off like this safety type thing, so you can attack pretty much anyone. There are some NPCs you can't attack, and they're generally quest givers. But it's a little strange. Like sometimes you'll take someone out alone in a small room, and you think no one saw you, but suddenly guard upon guard starts rushing in. You kill the first wave of guards and another one comes, and it just seems infinite. I'm not sure if it is because I reload my save at some point, but they seem to come at you infinitely. On the other hand, I killed a traveler in the wild with no one around, and no one was the wiser. So there you go. And there's no real benefit to randomly killing people. It's not like they carry anything of interest, or I don't know. Sometimes you'll get a quest again with this dark stuff, like it was part of the quest with the spider queen. This guy wanted me to investigate the disappearance of the town's mayor or leader or something like that, and he very subtly said, like he was saying, oh, I want you to confirm that this guy is dead, but he was very subtly saying, if he's alive, I want you to kill him because I want to take over the town. And I thought, wow, that's when it really first hit me that, wow, there's these kind of dark moments here in this bright fantasy world. And it took me by surprise, and I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I did. I found this guy. He was alive, the last survivor of this spider attack. And so I killed him. And for my troubles, I was given a home. So there are player homes. Then I exterminated the population of that town. So now my home is in a ghost town, surrounded by giant spiders. Awkward. Anywho, let's sum this sucker up. Graphics are good. Performance is good until it crashes. The story is reasonable. It's certainly not... Like, it's an interesting concept, but I'm not sure if they really took full advantage of the potential behind the whole Fateless One thing. The design of the world is pretty generic and uninteresting. However, the monsters, the enemies, with the exception of the humanoid stuff, are quite interesting. Like, there's some wacky designs of things and like interesting takes on fantasy creatures, so that's cool. The UI is crap and kind of barely works. It's not broken, but it's more like a supreme annoyance, I found. Combat is mostly awesome, very fast and fluid, and more importantly, combat is the reason that I kept coming back to play the game, because it feels so satisfying. The controls aren't particularly good on both controller and keyboard and mouse, and it's not like rebinding the keys isn't going to do it. It's very much a problem with the camera and how it works on a basic level. On the whole though, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning is a pretty good game. I'd say it's above average. If you like hack and slash RPGs with perhaps a little more depth, I'd highly recommend it, especially if you can get it as cheap as I did, under $12. That's insane. But even for like $30 and whatnot, I'd definitely recommend it. You get quite a few hours out of this, and I think the highlight, the fun, is definitely in the gameplay, in the combat. So there you go, folks. Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. I really reckon they should have changed that name to something shorter. But there you go. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.